certain you all know Lautrec had been born with a congenital disease that stunted him from his birth. This disappointed his father, who you see here. He had the wonderful name of Count Charles Alphonse Maurice de Toulouse-Lautrec Montmartre. Quite why he's wearing a kilt in that picture, I've never fully worked out. But when he realized his son was never going to be the great soldier and the great horseman that he had been, he lost all interest in the boy. And Lautrec was brought up almost entirely by his mother. His father didn't mind him becoming an artist on condition he didn't use the family name on the pictures. And to begin with, Lautrec always signs himself Tréclos, an anagram on Lautrec. It was only later that he defied his father and signed it with the family name. Lautrec realized that his appearance made him very unattractive, particularly to women. And he covered this over by being the life and soul of every party. He was the person who arranged all the boating parties, all the picnics for his friends. There was one famous occasion. He arranged a party in Montmartre, going from one restaurant to another, depending on their specialities. They went to one and they had the hors d'oeuvre, they then moved on to the next for the fish course, the next for the meat. When it came to the dessert, Lautrec took all his friends down to Degas' studio. He showed them the pastel on the easel, and he said, "There is your dessert for the day." Lautrec, like so many young artists at this time, literally adored the work of Degas. And as a result, you find his early paintings do echo the techniques of Degas a great deal. That one there, you'll notice, is very similar. The way in which he looks down on the girl sitting on the ground down there, the way in which he works those exchanges of warm and cold colors. One striking difference is that this is a pastel, whereas this is an oil painting. But Lautrec gets the same graphic effect into an oil painting by painting it on cardboard. And that, of course, draws the oil out of the paint and makes it stand still, and you get that same effect that you find in Degas' pastels there. It didn't please Degas too much. He said he's taken my clothes and cut them down to suit himself. He always had to be a little bit cruel in everything he said, although later on they actually became great friends together. That circle of friends that he entertained to all these parties came from the Atelier Caumont. Caumont is this figure here, that guy there, with a rather aquiline face. He was a painter of Neolithic life, a painter of cavemen. There is actually one or two in the Musée d'Orsay next time you're there, and they were very popular at the time. And he had a large studio of students. You see them all gathered around him here. This, of course, is Lautrec in the foreground there. He remained in the studio for about 5 years, not particularly because he learned a great deal, but he just liked the atmosphere. He liked the banter of being there. And it's there in Caumont's studio that he met Van Gogh. They were never going to be close friends. They were 10 years different in age. They came from very different backgrounds. But I think Lautrec identified an isolation in Van Gogh that he could identify with. And that's what he shows so clearly in that wonderful pastel drawing of him. You see Van Gogh sitting in a cafe in Montmartre, staring away into space, filled with that strange sense of loneliness that can come to you in crowded places. When Van Gogh arrived in Paris to stay with his brother, he brought with him that very tough, rather realist style that he developed back in Holland. And it's interesting to see his take on Montmartre. There's one of his first pictures of the Moulin de la Galette. I dare say a great deal more realistic than the ones we've seen so far. Really quite a rundown little establishment. This one here shows a close-up of the windmill itself. Just when his style is being tinged with neo-impressionism, you're just beginning to get the fragmenting of the brushstrokes there. When eventually Van Gogh left Paris and walked down to the south, he wrote a letter to his brother Theo saying, "You know that picture that ToulouseLautrec was painting when I left? When he's completed it, you should buy it." And Theo did. It's this picture here. He kept it with him for the rest of his life. It now hangs in the Van Gogh Museum. It's a wonderful painting, so delicate. These beautiful harmonics of greens and grays and blues, and that single note of red paint on the right-hand side there. But as you look at that picture, you recognize the model. Although he's made her look tired and rather haggard, we know her. That's Suzanne Valadon. She posed for him over and over again. She posed for that picture. She posed, for example, for this one here, a painting called The Hangover, something they both knew a great deal about by now. It's a wonderful, beautiful, fluid picture, these beautiful calligraphy, his brushstrokes here. Funny enough, it was Lautrec who gave her her name. She wasn't actually called Suzanne Valadon. She's called Marie Clémentine Valadon. But she was a very generous girl. She'd go out with any man who'd buy her a drink, very often elderly gentlemen. And as a result, Lautrec called her Susanna, a little joke from the Old Testament, Susanna and the elders. He gave her her name, and in return, she fell passionately in love with him. I think she was the only other woman apart from his mother who ever genuinely loved him. Eventually, she proposed marriage to him, but strangely, he turned her down. It seems odd. Here was a man who longed to be loved by women, but when the chance came, he spurned it. I think he realized it couldn't last, and he feared the pain of failure more than any pleasure it might bring in the short term. Spurned by Lautrec, she turned her attentions to a young composer in the evening. It occupied the building of the old post office in Montmartre. The outside looks a little eccentric. The inside was even more so. It was run by a man called Rudolf Salas. He's a bizarre character. He'd been everything from an archaeologist to a medal engraver during the course of his life. And now he turns his hand to opening a cabaret artistique. As you came in through the door, you were met with a sight even more bizarre than this room here. There were dried fish hanging from the roof, suits of armor, church pews. The waiters were dressed like students from the Académie Française. Everybody had performed there. Aristide Bruant used to sing coarse, bawdy songs. We know that Suzanne Valadon herself used to slide down the banisters absolutely stark naked, just wearing a mask to cover her modesty. And you could see the whole of Paris at the Chat Noir. You could rub shoulders with the King of Greece, the King of Serbia, along with English aristocrats, American politicians. Even Bertie, the Prince of Wales, used to turn up at the Chat Noir. He thought he was incognito until he walked in one night and Rudolf Salas was standing on the stage and he shouted out, "Good evening, whoever you are from England. How's your mother going these days?" And he realized he wasn't quite as incognito as he thought he was. Part of the success of the Chat Noir came from pictures like that. That is Steinlen's famous image of a cat. I think one of the great images a cat ever done, with its dark sulfur eyes there. I was very careful to call it a picture, not a painting, because of course this is a lithographic print. This is a poster. And these could be churned off the printing presses, put up on omnibuses, billboards and pissoirs all the way across Paris. This was the dawn of the age of publicity. And nobody understood publicity better than Rudolf Salas down here. The fact that he'd chosen a cat as the name for his cabaret is not chance. In some ways, cats are the symbol of Montmartre. Cats, of course, are independent and streetwise. They're sleek and beautiful, dangerous and predatory at the same time. They're the creatures of the back street, the shadows of the darkness. And there's something rather mystical about cats. In 1890, Steinlen had painted this picture. It shows all the cats of Paris standing on the rooftops, looking towards a great cat who sits in the halo of the sun there, on the top of Montmartre Hill, the sacred hill itself. Steinlen belonged to a group of artists called the Hydropaths. They'd actually started out on the left bank of Paris, but they were lured up to Montmartre by Salas in exchange for free food and free drinks, and they sort of set the tone of the place. They were boisterous, high-spirited, very talented. The idea of being called a hydropath was a little in joke again. A hydropath is somebody who is made ill by drinking water. And water was the one thing, as a result, they never, ever drank. Their leader was a character called Godot. You see him there. This is their own little magazine. I'm certain you know most of the artistic movements had their own little magazines where they put forward their ideas and their pictures. And this one here, you see Godot feeding the starving minds of the people of Montmartre, while up above, Justice bestows the laurel wreath of fame on his head, not somebody lacking in self-esteem. They actually staged Godot's funeral in the Chat Noir. They blackened the whole place down. Everybody walked around on tiptoe. You had to speak in whispers, but it was just a little in-joke. He wasn't dead at all. It just sort of created a bit of an atmosphere in the place. Eventually, it became the victim of his own success. Salas had to find new premises, but he didn't let the opportunity pass by. He turned it into a great parade. He got all the people in Montmartre to come down. They picked up all those dried fish, the suits of armor, and they carried them to the new premises. At the head of the parade was this enormous picture here by Villette. Now, this now hangs in the museum in Montmartre, but you have to imagine this used to dominate the side wall of the Chat Noir, and it tells you the whole story of Montmartre. Here on the right-hand side, you see Montmartre itself, the windmills lit up by the stage lights. And down below it, you see the whole carnival world of its fantasy spilling over Paris in a wild delirium. Some people floating on the backs of omnibuses, others on the back of black cats, inevitably, some on butterfly wings. On the left-hand side, you see Perrault, the sad clown who shot himself when he lost the love of Columbine to Harlequin. Up above, you see his body being carried by nuns past high-kicking chorus girls to the moon that rises like a great skull in the sky. And on the sails of the windmill is the title of the picture, Domine Pacis, spare us, O Lord. And that was really the motto of Montmartre, one the artists understood very well, that with success came the glittering prizes, came the bright lights, but it came at a price. Very few of them lived to be 40 years old, and this picture really tells that story. One of the great attractions of the Chat Noir were the silhouette plays. You see it in all the pictures. The silhouette plays, the silhouette theatres, came from Japan. What you had was a big muslin screen, backlit, and you had little cut-out figures which you danced around in just the same way as I can do a barking dog with my hand there. It doesn't sound that exciting, but of course it gave rise to tremendous flights of imagination. You could have stories about space travel, exploration of the center of the earth. Some people have actually attributed the origins of French cinema to the silhouette plays there in the Chat Noir. This is one of the posters for it. You can see how beautifully they made their little cutouts. A great number of artists worked for it. One was a man called Caran d'Ache. Those of you who draw will know Caran d'Ache has now given his name to a brand of very hard chalk, but originally he's an artist working in the Chat Noir. You can see some of the details there. Of course, with a silhouette, there is no halftone. There is no blurring or blending. It's either light or it's dark, and you get these stark silhouettes, and they would animate them. So this girl here, for example, walking up the street, is actually in two parts, and you can make her body move, and she sashays along. And Lautrec was fascinated by them. He loved the clarity, he loved the simplicity of the silhouette plays he saw in the Chat Noir, and they had a profound effect on his poster design, because color printing was in its infancy. You couldn't actually model forms in printing forms, and as a result, he learns from the silhouette plays to make these great big flat areas, flat black, flat red, a flat green, and just a delicate calligraphy of his face in profile. This, of course, is Aristide Bruant, one of the great singers of Montmartre. He used to sing very political, rather rude songs, and a voice so loud, it was said it sounded as though he'd swallowed a trumpet. When the Chat Noir closed down, he took on the premises. He ripped out the remains of all that Gothic furniture, replaced it with trestle tables, sawdust on the floor, a real working-class cabaret, and he called it the Militant. The first night he stood up to sing, there were only 9 people in the audience. One was a very smartly dressed man in a top hat. After a couple of songs, Bruant got fed up and walked off. This man objected. He said he'd paid money to hear him. He wanted to hear more, and Bruant told him to shut it in no uncertain terms. The next night, this man returned back, bringing many of his friends from Paris, and they started listening again. Halfway through, they began to object, this time because he wasn't abusing them. And he suddenly realized this is what people wanted up in Montmartre. They wanted to come up there to the cabarets, to feel the fury of the working classes in the safety of a theatre. And after that, Bruant put above the door, "Enter here, all ye who wish to be abused." And it became one of the great spectacles of Montmartre. When Lautrec made a poster like that, it went through a very, very carefully arranged series of stages. The first thing you do is to make a drawing. Now, this is a drawing showing the dancer called La Goulou, the greedy one, dancing with Valentine, the boneless one. But apparently he appeared to have no bones when he danced at all. And you can see in the drawing here, Lautrec has drawn Valentine in the foreground, La Goulou in the center, figures in the background there. I'm always fascinated by the fact that he adds in her rather orange hair, and he can't resist putting a little turquoise around it just to make it kick out from the surface. Once he's established the design, he transfers it over to a lithographic stone. Now, this is quite a complex process, in fact. What you do is you draw that same design using wax crayons on the surface. You put it in an acid bath, you wet it. It's a complex process. But what you do is make a series of stages of layers of color, which you print on top of each other. So the first thing you do is to lay down the reds and the yellows, and you see them there on top of each other. Onto that, he'll add a blue, which turns the yellows to green, and so on. And eventually, after about 9 separations, he'll add a black one over the top, and you get that famous poster. The intriguing thing is, it comes out slightly differently to the original drawing. It's much more two-dimensional, you'll notice. And Lautrec always plays with this. When you look at that drawing three-dimensionally, you can see Valentine in the foreground, La Goulou in the center, the figures in the background. But fun enough, in the poster, it becomes much flatter. And so what he does now is have La Goulou kicking up her skirts. He's so shocked by what he sees, he holds his hand up, and in return she kicks his hat off, which was a speciality of hers anyway. He always works the two together side by side, but of course this poster is advertising by far the most famous of all the cabarets in Montmartre, and that is the Moulin Rouge, which opened in 1884 at the base of the hill. I hardly need to tell you that, of course. Again, the name is so indicative. The running together of two different images, one the Moulin, the old nostalgic idea of the windmills in Montmartre, which sadly by then didn't exist at all, and that is coupled with the color red, the color of the red light district, the color of a brothel. And it's that imagery brought together that creates the mood of the Moulin Rouge. It's just on the edge of Montmartre and the rest of Paris, and there the social barriers broke down. High life met with low life, and Lautrec was there to record every single detail, and he does it with astonishing accuracy. Look at this one here. That's a pimp coming in the evening, checking up on his business. You know him immediately. The slouch of the shoulders, the fag in the mouth, the hat on the back of the head, the rather cocky look on the madame's face as she talks to him there. He normally made very rapid drawings on the spot and then worked them up back in the studio, using his friends as models, but he never loses the authenticity. Look at this one here. I don't even need to tell you what that is. That's an Englishman at the Moulin Rouge. The moment you see him, you recognize him. We know he's a guy from Trinity. We know him straight away there. You know that sightly, cocky twirl of the moustache. You can hear the drawl of the voice. You know that his wife has no idea where he is that night. Lautrec is incredibly accurate with that. The person, of course, we all know about is La Goulou, because whether you came from the Grand Boulevards or the gutter, you were all there for the same reason, and that is to watch the dancing of the can-can. It had started up in Montmartre at the Moulin de la Galette, the quadrille Réaliste. In those days, because of various laws, only people in a theatre were allowed to dress up in a costume. All the other dancing girls had to keep their working clothes on, and so to spice things up, they kicked up their skirts, and as you know, they didn't wear a great deal underneath, and this is where the quadrille Réaliste began. But really it was La Goulou who formalized it. She was the person who attached it to the music by Offenbach, and as a result, the can-can was born. You see her there in the center of that photograph. There is Valentine, the boneless one, on the right-hand side with his Jeremy Fisher legs there. Intriguingly, he wasn't a professional dancer. He was actually a wine merchant. He just did it in his spare time. It's said that La Goulou used to come into the Moulin Rouge in the evening on the arms of some of the other dancers, looking around herself with a hard, rather arrogant stare. One biographer said that she had the metallic eyes of a vampire. Another said she had the face of a dirty-minded baby. And you can see both of these perfectly in that picture by Lautrec. She was often joined on stage by a very, very different dancer. Tall, rather aristocratic, rather refined-looking woman. Many people felt that she was the daughter of an aristocrat, and who knows, maybe she was. She's certainly the daughter of a courtesan, who the father was rather. We'll never know. She's called Jeanne Avril. She used to dress severely, almost like an English governess. But when she danced, it was in a wild delirium of legs and arms. Again, you can see it so clearly in that picture by Lautrec. One biographer described her as having an air of depraved virginity about her.